The snow came quiet that winter, falling like it had forgotten how to make a sound. It drifted down over the prairie like ash from a prayer gone cold, coating fence posts, horse tracks, rooftops, and men's memories alike. And on a narrow road flanked by brittle corn stalks and ghosted fields, a wagon rolled slowly toward a deal already done. Inside it sat Audrey Bell Whitlow. She was 22, though her mother told people she was older, said it made her look less pitiful. Her cheeks were pale from the chill, her lips chapped from holding back words that hadn't been welcome in months. She wore her best dress, soft blue cotton with a row of pearl buttons that stopped at the neck like a promise unfulfilled. In her lap rested her hands, stitched together grace, barely trembling. Her father didn't look at her as they rode. He'd been born with too much pride and not enough coin, and now both were gone. Selling off cattle hadn't been enough. The barn had already collapsed from rot. He couldn't bear another whisper in town. His only daughter, childless after 2 years of marriage and returned like spoiled meat, was an insult he could no longer afford. So when the fur trapper from Missouri offered 4 mules, a rifle, and a jug of rotgut whiskey in exchange for her, no questions, no returns, her father said yes. The man wasn't cruel, just cold. Said he wanted someone to clean and warm his cabin and not talk much. She won't give you no children, her father had warned. I won't give her the chance, the man said back. They reached the edge of town by midday, the snowfall thickening. Even the church bell seemed muffled, like it didn't dare ring too loud in shame. Audrey stepped down from the wagon when told, her boots slipping slightly in the slush. No one helped her. The trapper stood waiting by the tree stump near the old mill, broad-shouldered, sun-scarred, smelling of blood and wood smoke. He nodded once and reached for the leather bag on his saddle, ready to hand over payment. But the arrow came first. It hit him square in the throat, quiet and clean. A single Lakota shaft, feathered red and black, jutting out like a sudden question no one knew how to answer. The man fell backward into the snow, his mouth working like he still had plans. By the time anyone looked up, no one was there. Just a shimmer of pine on the hillside, snow already covering the prints. Audrey didn't scream. She stood there, a breath caught in her chest like something holy. The sheriff came after, puffing and muttering, and too late. Savages again, he grumbled. Maybe they thought she was stolen. No one asked Audrey anything. No one wondered how she felt, watching the man who was about to buy her fall dead at her feet. They just turned her around, loaded her back into the wagon, and drove her home like leftover freight. Home was a 2-room house near the broken windmill. It smelled of wet wood and rusted prayers. Her mother, Maeve, didn't come out to greet her. She opened the door with a sigh and simply said, "Well, that's that." That night, Audrey was told she'd be sleeping in the shed, until something could be figured out. Her room had already been turned into storage. Her father said nothing. The shed was dry at least, and a single lantern was left with her, as if mercy came in ounces. She lit it and sat beside a stack of old quilts, staring at the flame until it blurred. Later she brushed her hair in the dark. There was no mirror, just the feel of the bristles and the weight of her braid like a thing she no longer owned. She sang under her breath, an old tune from childhood about fields that never died, even in snow. Her voice cracked once but never stopped. By morning the town buzzed. The trapper's body had been taken to the undertaker, but his arrow was passed around like a trophy. A warning, the sheriff said. That girl's cursed. They don't kill for nothing. Some swore she had conjured it, hexed the man. Others said she must have belonged to someone else already. Some whispered that the Lakota didn't want her dead, they wanted her back. Audrey heard none of this. She spent the day feeding a stray cat that wandered into the shed, letting it curl beside her in the quilts. She didn't cry. She didn't pray. She just sat, eyes open, as snow piled against the door. 2 nights later, a shadow moved through the trees. He came barefoot. Moved like a silence turned human. His name was Wicasa, Elk Run's Quiet. He had fought at greasy grass and seen the worst of men. He had buried too many brothers and had long stopped believing in forgiveness. But when he looked at her through the slats of the shed, something inside him paused. She was not beautiful in the way white men wrote songs about, but she was still. Still in that soft, unbothered way that suggested waiting had made her wise. The way the cat slept on her feet like it trusted her soul. He had been sent to kill her. An old debt gone bad, land promised, treaty broken, a girl taken. This was supposed to be balance. He lifted his knife. Just once. A quick cut would be mercy. But then she reached out and stroked the cat's ears, whispering something too soft to hear, and he felt the wind shift. He lowered the blade and stepped back into the woods. The next morning, Audrey found a small bundle on the doorstep, cornmeal, dried meat, and a scrap of flannel. No note. No explanation. She ate it slowly, with her hands, grateful but not afraid. It happened again the next night, and the next. Inside the house, Maeve grew colder. "You bring shame," she hissed, noticing Audrey's cheeks pinked from the walk to the well. "Shame draws shadows." Audrey said nothing. The cat purred louder these days. On the 6th night, Audrey looked up into the trees. Her voice didn't tremble. "Are you watching me?" she asked the dark. Pause. Then a rustle, soft as breath. She smiled just once and left the lantern burning long past midnight. The snow thickened again the next day. Her father's boots cracked at the heel. The roof sagged. And Audrey, forgotten and unmarried and barren, began humming again. This time not under her breath but into the air. Not loud. Just enough for whoever was listening. He first saw her again through falling snow, the kind that softened sound and made the world feel like a memory already slipping away. Wakasa crouched beneath a low pine, breath held, heart steady. Her figure moved through the yard like a ghost in cotton and shawl, slight, pale, and too quiet for this world. She carried a pail of water with 2 hands and left no trail behind her, as if the ground refused to admit she had ever walked it. He didn't blink. He had followed her father's wagon that day, watched the exchange from a hill, saw the arrow do what it had been told to do. The fur trapper had been a liar and a thief, promising the Lakota horses for land, then offering a barren woman instead. The arrow was justice. Swift, necessary. But the woman herself, Audrey, had not been justice. She was something else. Wakasa was not young enough to be foolish, nor old enough to be blind. He had seen men with eyes like hers. The look of someone who had outlived their purpose in the eyes of others but hadn't yet stopped breathing. He had been told she must die. Not as punishment but as payment. The deal made by the trapper had been desecrated. The woman, even if unaware, was now considered a wound that needed closing. And Wakasa was the one who closed such wounds. But she wasn't a wound. Not yet. Not from what he'd seen. She fed a half-starved cat each morning and shared her cornbread with it like it was her last friend on earth. She brushed its fur with a discarded twig. She held it with the care of a mother who'd once dreamed. And dreams to Wakasa were sacred. He watched her until she returned to the shed. Then he turned, walking uphill, his bare feet pressing into snow like the weight of memory itself. He said nothing to the trees. But they seemed to watch him with the same question in their branches. If she is guilty, why does she move like someone already punished? The next evening he brought her food. Quietly. Without sign or sound. He left it near the threshold, rabbit jerky, boiled corn, and a piece of flannel stitched with beads, something his sister had once made. Then vanished before she stepped outside. He did not expect the small breath she gave when she found it. He did not expect the way she paused, just a heartbeat too long, before she picked up the cloth and pressed it to her chest. He was supposed to strike then. And it, cling, efficient. But he found himself returning the next night instead. And the night after that. Each time she opened the door slower, looked outward longer, not searching but listening, as if some part of her soul remembered the sound of a kindness not demanded. He dreamed of her voice before he heard it, not in words, but in hums, echoes from inside the walls of his own winter lodge, where he kept no fire unless he meant to cook or stay. The dreams had her in them, not whole but becoming, not bold but brave. He began waking with her name on his tongue, not spoken, just felt. Audrey. Not the name the elders used. Not even the name her mother spat like spoiled milk. Just Audrey. He returned again on the 7th night and watched from across the frostglass window. Inside, she cradled the cat against her chest, her hair loose and her head bowed. There was a kind of music in the way she moved, even in silence. He didn't enter. He left more food. A small knife, sharp, clean, and wrapped in deer hide. A gesture of choice, not threat. She didn't take it that night. But she moved it inside by morning. Wakasa had not always followed orders. Once, during the battles, he had spared a settler boy no older than 10, dragging his wounded mother across a river. The boy had looked him straight in the eye. No hatred, no fear, just a kind of pleading that didn't come from the tongue. The elders said he was weak. But Wakasa had always believed there was strength in choosing not to strike. He did not know why Audrey reminded him of that moment. But she did. In town, things stirred ugly. The sheriff's wife had seen Audrey walking to the well again, said she looked too proud for someone whose betrothal had ended in blood. Another woman claimed she'd seen tracks that didn't belong to any God-fearing man, near the Whitlow shed. The whispers grew like frost on glass. She's got him watching her. She's bewitched. She's barren, but something's still growing in that shed. They didn't know who he was, but they feared him all the same. Maeve began locking the shed at night. Audrey didn't protest. She waited until the key turned and the boots faded, then lifted the edge of the board near the back wall, a trick she'd learned as a girl hiding sweets. A space barely wide enough to slip her hand through. That night, she reached through it and found warmth. A hand. Wakasa didn't flinch. He didn't move. But he didn't let go. Not until the lantern burned low and the cat stirred in its sleep, and Audrey's fingers slipped back like a prayer unfinished. He returned to his people once, just long enough to stand before the elder who had sent him. "I've seen her," Wakasa said. "And?" asked the old man, his face more wrinkled than skin. "She's not what we thought. She is a settler's cast-off. Her life was the payment promised. She is not payment. She is breath. Still breathing." The elder said nothing for a while. Then, "A blade doesn't question the hand that holds it." Wakasa's answer was quiet. "Maybe the blade remembers who it used to be." Snow thickened. The moon waned. The town waited for scandal or salvation, whichever came first. Audrey meanwhile grew steadier. She cleaned the shed. She rewove the torn quilt. She tucked the cat beneath her coat each night, and began brushing her hair again. One morning she opened the door before the sun rose. Stood there, barefoot. Wakasa stepped from behind the trees. Not close. Not yet. She didn't run. She didn't smile either. But she nodded. That was the moment something changed. Not between them but within them. A choice not made aloud. A promise not sworn. A path that no longer led to a knife. Later that night, she whispered into the darkness of her shed. "Who sent you?" No answer came. But the silence felt warm. The next morning, the town awoke to find the sheriff's barn ransacked, not robbed but opened. Inside, someone had written in soot across the wall, "Snow does not hide guilt. Only gives time to choose again." They blamed Audrey though she had not left the shed. They claimed it was her curse, her shame, her savagery. No one could explain why the barn door had no tracks near it. No one could explain why the cat hissed at the sheriff's wife. No one could explain why Audrey seemed taller that day, like a root finding water. She sat by the door that night waiting. He didn't come. Not in body. But something brushed her cheek, an absence that felt like presence. She smiled to herself, touched the knife still hidden in the straw, and said softly, "Tomorrow." The blizzard came sudden like guilt. Snow fell sideways, driven by wind sharp enough to flay bark from trees. It blanketed the prairie in moments, burying footprints, swallowing fences, silencing birds. Nothing stirred but the wind, and it howled like it mourned something that had never been born. Audrey watched it through a crack in the shed wall, wrapped in two quilts that smelled faintly of mold and old milk. Her breath clouded in the lantern light. The cat curled tight beside her ribs, thin and warm and alive. They'd forgotten to lock the shed that night. Or maybe they hadn't cared. Earlier, her mother had slapped the bowl of stew from her hand just for humming at the sink. It hit the floor with a dull splatter and no one spoke. Audrey had not cried. Instead, she had stepped out the back door and stood in the snow until her feet went numb. It felt cleaner than the kitchen. She hadn't gone back inside. Just wandered to the shed and stayed. No one came to find her. When the wind picked up, she didn't try to leave. She knew better than to return to where she was barely tolerated. But as the storm screamed and the lantern sputtered, the cat stirred and hissed. Someone was coming. The door creaked open, wind slamming against it like it had bones to break. Snow gusted in, followed by a figure half shrouded in furs and silence. Wakasa. He stepped in, shut the door, and knelt without a word. His arms cradled a bundle, thick hides, steaming cloth, something warm. He laid it gently beside her. Then, in the flicker of the failing lantern, he spoke. "You will freeze." His voice was low, wind-worn, like river stones smoothed by years. She looked at him wide-eyed. Then down at the thick buffalo skin and the sealed clay pot wrapped in flannel. She touched the pot. It was still hot. He didn't look away. She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. It had been too long since her voice had been treated like something worth hearing. He seemed to understand. He held up a hand, gentle, open-palmed, and then reached over, pulling the quilt around her tighter. Audrey looked down at the cat in her lap, then back up at him. "Why are you here?" she asked finally. A beat passed. "To undo a wrong," he answered. Then he stood as if ready to leave. But a gust of wind blew hard against the door, and the lantern went out with a soft sigh. Neither of them moved. She reached out, touched his wrist. "You'll freeze too," she said. The air between them felt thick, not romantic, not tender, just real, like the pause before truth. He sat beside her without asking, pulled the hide up over both their shoulders. They sat close, not touching, listening to the wind punish the world. After a long silence he spoke. I was told to end you. Because of a man's lie. She nodded, unsurprised. He said I was barren. I suppose that made me worthless to trade. You are not barren, he said softly. Only unbloomed. Her throat caught. The fire in the pot warmed the space slowly. The shed creaked. Somewhere, snow slid from the roof with a dull thump. He opened a small pouch and handed her a strip of dried plum. She took it, chewed carefully. They shared food without speaking, and something inside her, some invisible part that had gone pale with neglect, started to remember color. He didn't ask for her story. She didn't ask for his. But when she dozed and her head drifted toward his shoulder, he didn't pull away. By morning, the storm had softened into steady flurries. A hush lingered over the fields, like everything was holding breath. Wakasa stood first, unwrapped the hide and looked out through a crack. No, Prince, he murmured. We are ghosts again. Audrey rubbed her arms, blinking the night from her eyes. Where will you go? Nowhere. Not without seeing what you become. He handed her a carved piece of antler, a tiny bird with folded wings. You carved this. He nodded. What kind of bird is it? One that does not sing unless it's alone. She turned it in her palm, then smiled, small and real. Sounds familiar. Before he left, he touched her hand once. Just once. And she didn't flinch. In town, the storm had buried fences and half the gossip with it. But tongues still wagged. They'd seen Audrey with a figure near the tree line. Said she was consorting. Maeve cornered her that evening, spitting words like coals. Bringing shame to this family, walking out there like some field woman. Who do you think you are? Audrey didn't answer. She simply turned away. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel cold when her mother's voice struck her. The warmth from that buffalo hide still clung to her skin. That night, she walked to the edge of the tree line. Snow creaked under her boots. Stars hung heavy, blurred with frost. He was already waiting, arms folded, back against a pine. She didn't speak. Just stood beside him, watching their breath fog and fade. He handed her a folded piece of linen, a dress. It was my sister's, he said, when she still danced. Audrey traced the embroidery. Each thread looked like it had purpose. I haven't danced since I was 12, she whispered. Then the earth is waiting. Days passed like pages turning slowly. Each one stitched another piece of breath between them. They never touched more than hands, never kissed. But there were things deeper than touch. Like how she now tied her hair up, not because her mother expected it, but because he looked at her like the act was holy. Like how he sat while she mended her boots, and listened to the soft hum she sang without shame now. Like how, one evening, she reached for his hand first. The townsfolk grew restless. The sheriff said he'd seen tracks where no man should tread. A woman at the store claimed Audrey smelled foreign. Maeve spread word that her daughter had gone native, as if it was a disease. But Audrey no longer bowed under words. One morning she stood at the well while others watched. She let the scarf fall from her head, showed her unbraided hair to the wind. The sheriff's wife gasped. Someone muttered a curse. But Audrey only dipped her bucket and walked away. That night, back in the shed, Wakasa brought her something different. A necklace made of bone and feather, tied with horsehair. She looked at it, then at him. I'm not yours, she said. He nodded. I don't want to belong to anyone. Still he nodded. I want to choose. He reached for her hand and laid the necklace in her palm. Then choose, he said. Or burn it. I won't stay if I'm only filling a space. She studied him. Then quietly tied the necklace around her own throat. And in that moment she wasn't claimed. She was becoming. The moon hung low that week, swollen, yellowed, veiled behind gauze-thin clouds, and everything beneath it felt like it had been touched by breath. Not quite alive. Not quite dead. Just waiting. Audrey walked the edge of the fields at dusk, shawl tucked over her shoulders, braid trailing down her back like an old story remembered too late. Her boots were worn, but she walked with a steadiness that had not been there in winter. Each step felt claimed. The cat still followed her some nights. Others, it stayed behind, curled in the quilt as if guarding the shed like a temple. She no longer asked permission to walk. The town noticed. Women whispered in the general store. Men stopped talking when she passed. Children stared too long. They had no proof. No ring, no preacher's words. But the way she moved, silent, unhurried, unashamed, said she belonged to something. And they hated not knowing what. Sheriff Crow began watching her from the corner of his eye, through the lace of his wife's parlor curtains. He chewed the stem of his pipe like it owed him an answer. Her eyes looked too alive, he muttered one night. No woman like her has business looking that free. Audrey came home late one evening and found her mother standing by the well, arms folded like a scarecrow that had been waiting all day. "You've been walking with him," Maeve said, her voice clipped as ice. Audrey didn't answer. "I know what you're doing. Filthy. Unnatural. Letting yourself be seen like that. After all we gave you." Audrey let her shawl slip from her shoulders. "You gave me away," she said softly. Maeve's hand struck her cheek, quick, practiced, cruel. It didn't sting. Not the way it used to. Audrey looked into her mother's eyes, not with defiance but with a strange, sad calm. "You can stop calling me daughter now," she said. "It was never a name you meant kindly." She walked away, hair unbound, hands empty. The next morning, a note was nailed to the church door. "The girl consorts with a savage. Her womb is cursed. Her soul darker." It wasn't signed. But everyone knew who wrote it, and everyone who read it said nothing aloud. Because most agreed. By midday, Audrey was summoned to the center of town. Not officially. Just gathered. Crowds do not need law when they believe they have righteousness. She arrived with her head high, in the same patched dress, with the cat curled under her arm. Someone shouted, "Whore of winter." Another, "Heathen lover." A rock landed at her feet. A second grazed her arm. Sheriff Crow raised his voice. "You've drawn danger into our town, girl. The man you meet in the woods, he's not our kind. He's got no claim on you." Audrey stepped forward. "No one ever claimed me," she said, voice steady. "Not my parents. Not the man who tried to buy me. Not your God. So why does it frighten you that I choose for myself?" The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "She's bewitched," someone whispered. Someone else muttered, "Take her hair. Make her clean." Maeve stepped from the crowd, scissors in hand. Audrey didn't move. She knelt in the snow, laid the cat gently aside and pulled her braid forward. If they were going to shame her, she'd at least offer them her dignity on her own terms. They hacked it roughly, a crowd of small cruelties, and let the hair fall like rope into the slush. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She stood once it was done, looked out at the sea of eyes that could not meet hers. Then from the woods behind the blacksmith's barn came a figure. Not charging. Not shouting. Just walking, calm, deliberate, bare-chested despite the cold, a red cloth tied around his arm. Wakasa. He stopped 3 paces from the sheriff. Didn't reach for a weapon. Didn't speak. He just knelt in the snow, palms open, eyes on Audrey. She stepped toward him slowly, barefoot now, her boots stolen in the scuffle, her feet red and raw. But her posture remained tall. The wind blew soft between them. He did not rise. She did not lower herself. They stood in a silence deeper than judgment. Someone in the crowd coughed. Another looked away. And then the elder woman came. No one knew her name. Only that she had lived near the river since before the railroad came. She wore a faded shawl of earth tones and feathers, and her hair was braided with herbs. She walked through the crowd without resistance, placed one hand on Wakasa's shoulder, one hand on Audrey's back, and nodded. Then she turned to the townsfolk and spoke the only words anyone would remember from that day. "Snow is not sin, and silence is not shame." She led the pair out of town, past the edge of the cottonwoods where no fences reached. No one stopped them. Not because they agreed, but because shame clings harder to those who cast it. They reached the place where Wakasa's people once camped, a ring of trees wrapped around a quiet clearing. The fire pit still held embers from months ago, blackened but not dead. Audrey sat beside the remains and laid her braid atop the stones. Wakasa sat across from her. "You do not belong to me," he said. "No," she said. "I belong to no one." She lifted her chin. "But if you want to walk beside me, I won't walk away." He nodded. Then he pulled from his satchel a strip of leather, soft, dark, and lined with bone beads. He offered it to her. Not as a collar. Not as a gift. As a bridge. She took it. Wrapped it around her wrist like a promise made only to herself. That night, she slept in his winter lodge. Not as a wife. Not as a kept woman. But as Audrey. No surname. No shame. She wore the shortened hair like a crown. Ate with her fingers. Laughed for the first time in a season. He watched her from across the fire, his eyes quiet, his hands still. She noticed. "What do they call you?" she asked. He tilted his head. In my tongue, Wakasa. What does it mean? Man. She smiled. Then I'll call you what you are. He pointed to her chest. And what are you? She didn't answer. But in the stillness, a whisper rose inside her, not yet spoken but true. Not daughter. Not wife. Not Baron. Just Audrey. And for the first time her name felt like it had weight. Like it had come home. The snow began to melt in the third week of March. Not loudly, just with the slow, patient drip of forgiveness. Icicles wept from roof edges, and the path between the lodge and the cottonwoods grew muddy with thaw. The land stretched awake beneath the sun, unsure whether to hope or brace again. Audrey stood barefoot on the softening earth, her toes sunk deep in mud and memory. Her hair, hacked short weeks ago, now framed her face like a storm that had passed but left its mark. She wore the leather wristband Wakasa had given her and nothing else of the past. Not the pearl-button dresses. Not the faint perfume of approval. Just linen and quiet. She was feeding crows when the rider came. Dust didn't rise behind him, only a trail of cracked snow and fear. It was Sheriff Crow, slouched over the saddle, face drawn tight like a man who'd run out of his own rules. He didn't dismount when he reached her. He just stared down at her with those lawman's eyes, dull and angry, already beaten by something he hadn't named yet. There's been talk, he said, that you've been seen on Lakota land. That you're joined with one of them. Audrey didn't answer. The crows hopped closer, watching. I don't care what you do out here, he muttered, spitting onto the ground. But people want order. They need to know what box to put you in. She tilted her head. You had your chance to label me, she said. Now I'm just what's left when the labels fall off. He sniffed, shifted in his saddle. You're making trouble where there didn't need to be any. You brought scissors and silence to a girl and called it peace, she replied. That was your mistake. He reached for the rifle on his back, slowly, not threatening, just showing. I'm warning you. And I'm not afraid. Something in her tone, low-rooted, made him pause. Behind her, Wakasa appeared. Not with fury. Not with blades. Just standing. Unmoving. Present. Crow saw him, stiffened. You really think this ends with you two living out here like spirits in the woods? The town won't forget what's happened. I don't want them to forget, Audrey said. She stepped forward. I want them to remember exactly what they tried to bury, and that I bloomed anyway. The sheriff opened his mouth to speak, but a sound stopped him. A drum. Soft, slow, carried on the thaw-wet wind. He turned his head. From the trees emerged more figures, Lakota elders wrapped in wool and silence. Women with braids like river paths. Children clutching bells. And beside them, the old woman, the one who'd spoken only once in town but who now stood tall like a cedar whose roots remembered fire and rain. She raised her arm. The drumbeat stopped. Then she nodded at Audrey. Without words the message passed. You are no longer waiting. You are being. Crow swallowed. His hand left the rifle. His heels turned the horse. And then he was gone. No battle. No shootout. Just a retreat. Because sometimes the strongest line is drawn by standing still. That night, Audrey sat beside the fire in the lodge, her legs tucked beneath her, the cat on her lap, Wakasa beside her sharpening a blade he hadn't used in weeks. She stared into the flames. I didn't scream, she said. No, he said. You didn't have to. I thought I would. When they came at me with the scissors. When they called me things I didn't earn. I thought I'd fight. Or cry. You did something harder. She looked at him. I stood still. He set the blade down. Took her hand. Still is not the same as silent. They sat that way for a long time. No need for ceremony. No preacher. No contract. Just the fire. The choice. The presence of two people no longer hiding from themselves. In the weeks that followed, the town did not speak her name. But they did speak her story. Some said she'd bewitched the warrior. Others said she'd been taken against her will. A few swore they'd seen her dancing barefoot in the moonlight, wearing feathers and beads and shame like armor. They all agreed on one thing. She had not broken. And that unsettled them more than any sin ever could. In spring, Audrey built a new shed beside the lodge. Not for storage. For stories. She painted its door red, the color of strength in Wakasa's people, and carved names into the frame. Names of women she'd known. Some dead. Some forgotten. Some still pretending to be obedient. It became a place where wild herbs dried, where feathers hung, where silence grew into language. Women came. Not many. Not at first. But enough. Wakasa watched without speaking. She was not his to keep. She was his to witness. One evening she found a mirror, cracked, spotted with rust at the edges, left behind in an abandoned wagon. She cleaned it, hung it on the lodge wall, looked into it, and did not flinch. Her reflection met her like an equal. No longer someone waiting to be claimed, named, or corrected. Just Audrey. Rooted, risen, real. Later that night, she lay beside Wakasa, their bodies not tangled but aligned the way riverbanks hold water, not to own but to shape gently. She whispered, "I used to wonder if I'd ever be enough." He touched her shoulder, slow. "You were always enough." She nodded, but her smile was quiet. Then came the final moment, the one she didn't expect to need. She reached into the satchel beneath her bedroll, pulled out a strand of her own cut braid, saved from that day in town. Dry, pale, soft as time. She tossed it into the fire. The flames caught quick. For a second the lodge filled with a sweet, scorched scent. The scent of what had once been, burning to make room for what came next. And out in the dark, where footprints softened in the thawing snow, the first shoots of spring broke the surface. Small, green, unapologetic.